Welcome everyone. I am so impressed that you're here. It is rainy, it is cold. Melbourne's done that switch between seasons, so congratulations for making it and thank you. My name is Emily Sexton. I'm the Director of Programming here at ACMI, and I'd like to, on behalf of all the team here, acknowledge that we're gathered here on Wurundjeri country and pay my respects to elders past and present, and indeed to all Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people joining us tonight. The catalyst for today's discussion is the 60th anniversary of Play School. And to mark this occasion, ACMI and the ABC have collaborated to create a new exhibition that explores how children play now. The exhibition is free, and since it opened, we've welcomed over 15,000 children and their grown-ups to come behind the scenes of this beloved and iconic Australian TV show. So we've also, alongside the exhibition, launched 3 talks as an opportunity to really delve deeper into some of the ideas and aspirations behind not just Play School, but the wider landscape of children's media at this time. It is certainly an evolved offer that children and their carers are navigating now than what was available when I was little. And some of it is amazing and some of it's super challenging. And we think these shifts make for some really interesting territory for us to explore. To help us do that, we've got 3 fantastic international and national experts bringing a wealth of knowledge in children's media, in early childhood education, and in digital play, language and learning. And I'm going to welcome them here. Please put your hands together. So we've got Anthony Semann, who is an early childhood educator, author and co-founder of Semann and Slattery, a national consultancy supporting early years practice and leadership across the country. With over 35 years' experience. You don't look like you have 35 years' experience, Anthony. He's recognised for his work in play-based learning, pedagogical leadership, and building equitable, relationship-focused education environments. Next to him, we have Professor Louise Paatsch, who is a very good friend of ACMI's. She's the Deputy Director of Deakin University's Strategic Research Centre in Education, and the Deputy Director and Chief Investigator of the ARC's Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child, of which ACMI is a part. Her research focuses on children's language, digital play and pretend play abilities, with a strong focus on children's social use of language in diverse contexts. And next to me here is David Kleeman. He's the Senior Vice President of Global Trends for Dubit, a research firm and game studio, and founder of the consultancy Playvangelist. As a strategist, analyst, author, speaker and connector, he's led the children's media industry in the States in developing sustainable, kid-friendly practices for 35 plus years. David's perspective is that for all the changes, children's development and needs remain constant. So thank you all for being here. Let's give them a really warm welcome. Thank you. The opportunity we have tonight is not just a conversation with these really great people, but also an opportunity to involve you in the discussion. Can I get a show of hands as we start? Who here is an educator? Oh, okay, wow. Well done, you're really showing up. A carer or a parent or caregiver works in the screen industry? Great, okay. What have I missed? Anything else? That's okay. That's who's here. That's really helpful. So what's going to happen today is we're going to have a conversation for about 40 minutes, an hour. We've got a couple of really interesting pieces of media to watch in amongst that. And we're also then going to turn to your questions. And to do that, we're using a technology called Slido. If you use your phone, you scan that QR code and you can put your questions in while we're having the conversation. And the really good thing is then we don't lose them when we get to them at the end. So I really encourage you to jot those thoughts down as we go. But to kick us off, what I would love to do is for each of you to introduce your practice through the lens of how you currently understand play or playfulness. What brought you to that position and how has it shifted throughout your career? Anthony, I might start with you. How do you define play and how's that evolved for you?
As an early childhood teacher, and I've gone back into the classroom, I've been back in the classroom now for about a year and a half working with 3-year-olds part-time. I see the way they engage in play as a way of letting adults into their worlds. It's a way that they're making sense of what's occurring, a way of communicating back to us what fascinates them, what troubles them. But it's also this idea of play being a vehicle of them connecting more broadly with each other. It's like a language for them, often spoken, many times not spoken. I also don't want to see play as something that's politically neutral, because it never is. I see it as politically charged with young children. So some of the challenges that they face can show itself in play. It's not always beautiful and neat and tidy. And I think it's that complexity of children engaging in that way of doing the world that really intrigues me. Yeah.
And how, for you, from that early childhood perspective, how does that intersect with their use of media, or how does media show up in the play that you observe, or how you define that play?
Yeah. The reality is, from my perspective, they're engaged in media probably a bit more than I am, because they're forever teaching me about what's popular and what's not. Like I keep talking about Ninja Turtles, and they just look at me like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So I've learnt about Bluey through children.
Yeah.
I've learnt about what's current. But, even before they say it, I see it in their play. I can see what's popular and what's not through how they're acting out and how they're interacting, whether it's through drawing or clay. Play is not always about the movement of the body. Sometimes it's about the movement of their hands, which is part of the body, but through their drawing and their clay work. It lets me into conversations about what matters to them. So it's really one of those primary vehicles of not only children learning, but as educators around them learning what matters to them. Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah. Louise, I'm curious to ask that same question to you. How do you define play in your work, and perhaps how has that shifted for you over your career?
I think for me, the basis of play, and if we think about the child at the centre of all of this, and we refer to the rights of the child, play is actually a right of the child according to what we know at the United Nations Convention for the Rights of the Child. It's actually Article 31, I think, which is clearly there, that play is the right of every child in the world, and we know that. What's play for me? I think it's, as a researcher said, it's a roomy subject that has a long history, but also has, I think, various definitions. And I'm sure all of us sitting in this room, when you ask that question, what's play, we've all got various definitions. And in research, people talk about play as perhaps characteristics of play. We talk about play as, is the child doing it by themselves? Are they doing it with other people? But for me, and I think because it's probably my centre of research, is that I look at the types of play, and children do gameplay, they do play with blocks, they do auditory play, they do sensory motor play. But for me, it's about pretend play, because I think all of those things come under that umbrella of pretense, or as others would say, imaginary or symbolic. And for me, that's really important, because it's about cognitive, it's around how children think, how children learn, how they represent their world. For some, it's a safe space. It's also a way, it's therapy, it makes them happy. We know that if children have joy in their life, that they're ready to learn. We know that what that does to the brain and how that affects them. We know that it's also a way of releasing stress and anxiety in a world that's quite tense, as we all know. It's a way that they can explore. For me, they pretend, so they're using their imagination, they're using their curiosity, they're using objects around them that represents the world. It's not always pleasant, we know that. It can be complex, it can also create conflict within the play, but we know that that's part of the skills of young children as they negotiate, as they collaborate, as they co-construct, as they disagree. And we know from the research that we've done that around about that age of 3, when children are also developing language, we also know that they're developing their theory of mind, taking the perspective of another person, and all of a sudden they realise that not everybody has the same idea as me, nor do they have the same beliefs as me, nor is their culture the same as mine, nor is it what they're allowed to do at home the same as mine, or the resources that they have. And we see this play out in their play, and how they negotiate that and how they, problem solve and learn beyond that, which, as we know, I think you used the word vehicle before, and we often see that in the literature, that it's a vehicle for young children's learning across academic things, across self-motivation. It's about self-regulating, all of those cognitive skills as well. So has it changed? I think play is represented differently because of the tools which we know that are around them, but the structure of it and the skills of play, I don't believe have changed dramatically. People, they worry about media or digital, whichever term, which are slightly different, but digital is a part of their life, and some of the work we've done, and people in this room have done as well. Children don't see digital, non-digital. Children are just children, and I had a phone like this, but now they have like this, and in their play, you can be sitting there and you'll play shops or something with them, and you'll say, present a problem in the play that they have to resolve, and you say, I haven't got any money. They said, you've got a phone, just tap it. So, they know how to get around things that perhaps adults, like you said, are kind of fearful of. That's just their life. So I could go on, I'm sorry, I'll go.
No, that's great. David, you were nodding quite a lot. Does that chime with your experience?
It really does match. First of all, let me say thank you to ACMI for inviting me to be here. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be up on the stage with wonderful people. We often try to put media into dichotomies of education and entertainment, and if you read Marshall McLuhan, he says anyone who says there's a difference between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either one. Or we talk about digital play, and as you were saying, digital play and physical play, really they've merged for the child at this point, and they get a lot of inspiration from the media that they consume, but they also bring those stories together. And so what you see in effective use of media for play is things that that open up the world for a child. You can make programming, you can make content that is a funnel and that narrows down the world. And I've seen kids try to play with media stories or characters that have created that funnel, that have said, this is how you play with it, this is the only way to play with it. And it's very frustrating for children to have a character or a story that they would like to expand on, but they feel they can't break free from the way the stories have been told. The funnel idea is there's a wonderful quote from a U.S. early childhood educator that the best toys are 10% toy and 90% child. And I think that's true of media as well, that the more room you leave for the child to insert themselves into the play, to go on after the television is turned off or the tablet is put down, and improvise on that. And what we were just seeing in the Play School exhibition is such a great example of that. So I think that the best, for play for children, you really have to start from engagement. And that's where the McLuhan quote comes back, is it's not education, it's not entertainment, it's engagement. It's getting the child's attention, getting their imagination put into taken away from the screen.
Louise, I would love you to tell us a little bit more about what you've observed by spending time in the exhibition, because you've been working with families, all sorts of different kinds of families, and really kind of paying attention to what they're doing. I guess in the exhibition, but it tells bigger stories, really, about how these families are, well, it tells all sorts of stories, actually, about how they interact with each other, but also how those kids are playing and what their pretend play capacities are, and all sorts of things. I'd love you to give us a little insight into that work.
So for those that don't know that, what we've done, thanks to the amazing ACMI team as well as the ABC with Play School, have put the exhibition on. And we've been very fortunate enough to come in there and do some of the research around what's happening in that space. And we've had fabulous people in the room here who are on the cameras. And they've set up cameras at around about 6 or 7 cameras around that space. So what have we noticed? We've noticed a lot of talk, and I think for me that's of great interest, is the talk of the adults with the child and how they scaffold. Not surprising, given that the age range that have been through are 2 to 5 year olds. What we're seeing is typically developmental as well. So for the 2-year-olds, we will see that their engagement is shorter. They like tactile, they pick up things. For example, where the windows are on one of the sides where there's the push button, it's not surprising that they're pushing the button, waiting for something to happen. It's that cause and effect, which is part of them building narrative. If you do something, something else might happen. And then you've got the parents beside them scaffolding that. If you try that, I wonder what happens. And so already you're getting this sort of curiosity and prediction. Not surprising, we're seeing a lot of the 3 and 4 year olds to 5 year olds, and we will do a heat map of this. We're still going. We've had 25 families through. We've got another 15, I think, still to come. A lot of data in there for all the researchers in here. And so what we're seeing, not surprising, is they're going to the maker area. So where there's a big television, the children can go behind there. They're doing a lot of pretend play. Again, we're seeing the developmental of the child that will pick up the lettuce as the lettuce and put it into the bag, versus the child that will pick up that lettuce and that will become a rocket ship. Finally, it becomes something that flies through that they want to film in their film. And then in front of that, you've got another child or the parent that can then use the control board. And the control board is, again, the 2-year-olds, not surprising, pressing the button, what's going to happen, to the 4 and 5 year olds who are actually directors. And they're in there and they're saying, you have to move that. They found the zoom on the cameras. They move in. They're usually doing the food and they're yelling out, which one of the 4-year-olds did to his 2-year-old sister. Just hang on, don't eat that food. I'm zooming in to check it's healthy, then we'll zoom out. So in these conversations that are happening, we're seeing sort of cultural, we're seeing the effect of family, what they're doing at home, inside and outside of the home, which is what we see in play skills. For example, 2-year-olds will observe, then they'll copy, then they'll do things in and out of the home. For children, by the time that they're 4 or 3, 3-year-olds will start to put fictional stories in their play, and they will have fairy tales, and they will have characters from whatever they're watching. So not surprising, Ted, even though Ted wasn't there, and or Jemima, they started to appear in the play, or if it was Bluey or if it was Paw Patrol or whatever, but what they're watching on typically television. We then go in and we interview the children. 2-year-olds, I might add, were really tricky as soon as you walk them out of there. But we got to the 3 and the 4-year-olds, and again, what were they doing in there? It's the pretense, it's the curiosity. I was the director. And you can see at the time that they're 4, they've got this theory of mind. What's the perspective of the character? You move over there, you have to do this. It's understanding that they're a character, the character's alive, that the character has got to do things. There's a series of sequence of things that have to happen, which then the film is made. So they're already in their play, having sequences in their play. And then the language matches that. So we're seeing a lot of that through perhaps sort of some of the pick up and drop down, they're not creating as much. The parents scaffolding what that exhibition about behind the scenes, and once they got that, then, oh, is that what it's about? And then off they go, particularly the 4 and 5 year olds.
Will you go back to families after that you've interviewed here and talk to them after to see how their play changes at home if they incorporate the television play into it?
We've got an interview, sort of an open survey 2 weeks later, and we've also asked them for any artefacts that they've used in the home that might have been inspired by that. And since then we've had a preschool come to us and say, can we come and bring the kids, because we're doing what's fantasy, what's real and what's not, because they're 4-year-olds, so they're ready for that, what's real and what's not real. They're also linking it into online safety, because we know that how important that is. And again, here were these group of kids going, that could be a scam, so it's the language of the online safety that's been played out through the play, but sort of exposing them to these issues of what's going on in society as well. So it's been fascinating. Stay tuned. There's so much data, but thanks to the great filming and that's happened, we'll see quite a lot of that come through.
Anthony, what Louise has described, does that sound very familiar to you in terms of what you would observe in a sort of day-to-day environment in an early childhood setting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges that and I'd love to hear people's perspectives, I grapple with is, and maybe there isn't a delineation between play and playfulness. See, I see playfulness rise up outside of what we might traditionally call play.
Do you want me to answer that
Yeah, I
question?
would love, yeah.
Oh my. I see slightly different. I think there's playfulness and playful learning, but I see what in my area that I look at in that area of play, as in pretend play, that can be playful, but it cannot be as well, because there's challenges of, I've come with a script in mind that I want to be the director and I want you to sit over there, but hang on a minute, that one doesn't want to sit over there because I actually want to be the director. So there's this conflict. Is that playfulness? It's playful learning, but it's sort of all embedded, I think. Yeah. But I think there was a paper by Zosh about 5-6 years ago, and he and the work of Kathy Pasek-Hurst in the US, there's kind of 5 main skills around playful learning. And, one of them is that iterative, it's about joy, it's about being meaningful. So, and others that, it can go across the board. But play, again, I mean, the audience, how do you all kind of define play? It's a roomy subject, as we say, and I think, centuries and centuries we've been trying to define play, and it's tricky. But it is about playful learning as well, with those, experiences.
We've been reflecting a lot around the ways in which children learn, and there's often a tight narrative around you learn through play. But in our observations within our classrooms and the outdoors is they learn in ways not associated with play. For example, if they're drawing, they're drawing. Is that play? If they're reading, they're reading. Is that play? We've been dancing around these ideas because there's a point where we do want to protect play, but it's come up through our noticings of children. Even when they're engaging with technology, are we noticing play here or playfulness in what they're doing? And I don't know, it's...
A lot. It has to do, I think, a lot in terms of playfulness with the structure of it. I'm thinking initially of apps on a tablet, for example, where they can either be very instructive, push this button and something will happen, something will pop up, and it does it the same way every time. There's also the open-ended approach to it. Toca Boca is a company that has done probably some of the best work with that, where there is no destination, there is no winning or losing, there's just a set of tools within, and you work with those tools however you want to. We see wonderful ways of incorporating digital into physical, as I was talking about before, where with a Toca Boca app, for example, with their dinner party, kids bring their stuffies to the screen and they set them up around and they start to construct story around it and become very playful with the app, which I guess is their form of play. If I'm thinking about some of the television programs that I've seen, it has to do often with leaving space within the program. That some of the best young children's programs I've seen have had young children on the screen, and the director has not rushed them in any way. The director has not pushed them to, yes, but now you have to go and do this, but just sat back and said, let's let the child do it their way. And the result is more expansive. You have to have a tolerance for downtime, for things not happening. But at the same time, you really see the individual personality of the child come out and the playfulness of the child.
David, I'm interested from your perspective, shows like Play School were originally created in a very curated broadcast environment. But today children encounter stories through television, streaming, games, YouTube. I think YouTube is 13% of their media consumption or something. So I'm interested in what has changed in terms of their relationship with media and actually what's stayed very consistent.
Well, I would say I don't often get a chance to put Jeff Bezos and Piaget in the same sentence, but Piaget would say that child development doesn't change, the context around it does. And Bezos said, people ask me all the time, what's going to change in the next 10 years? And they never ask me what's not going to change, and I think that's much more important. I think if you look beneath the surface of a lot of forms of media right now, whether they're television, whether they're interactive, looking at an older audience, whether they're social, beneath the surface you can see the sort of underlying constructs of play. You look at a platform like Roblox, the gaming platform, and that really is a very social platform. Particularly during the pandemic, kids gathered in Roblox. They held birthday parties in Roblox because down on the corner, when up on the server, they weren't able to be with their friends in person. I think you could not pitch Play School, Sesame Street, Blue Peter, any of the sort of, With Mother from Japan, any of the classic children's programs that have lasted 50, 60 years. You could not walk into someone's office and say, here's what I want to make, and have them take it. And yet, it is so important that they've survived and that they've not thrived and found their way to be part of a new generation because of this idea that underneath it all, children have the same developmental needs that they've always had.
Right.
And programs that last a long time speak to those essential needs. They're not trying, as Bezos would say, they're not trying to chase what's now. They're trying to look at what doesn't change. Mm-hmm. Kids have so many more options right now. I would say, though, 2 to 5 is the most stable group, that they really do have consistent needs and interests and abilities. It's at age 6 where they really start to diverge, and they develop peer groups, and they develop hobbies and passions, and that's where it's become really hard to build an audience, to build a cohort, because they've fragmented at that point.
Oh, there's so many interesting things you've just raised.
Yeah.
But I think maybe it is a good time to look at some of that media. So we'll go to the first clip, thanks, Dargs. And this is, a compile from an episode of Play School that we're going to watch.
Play School. It's Play School.
Welcome to the Make and Create Studio. Let's craft or build or decorate. But first the question, what should we make? A bit of blue, sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle.
And some white, sprinkle, sprinkle. And why not some pink spots? Sprinkle, sprinkle, sprinkle. There.
Now we put the top on the mould. Would you like to see what you've made?
Yes, please.
Ta-da! An ice cream scoop.
Wow. An ice cream scoop. Do you like ice cream?
Ning nang nong, cows go bong. Nong nang ning, trees go bing.
Pop this pretty pansy into my gumboot, so gently out of the pot and loosen up the roots a bit. Oh, not too much. And in it goes. And pat it down carefully. Pat, pat, pat. Well, it's time for us to go now.
Maybe you'd like to make a silly outfit out of things you find around the house and do a fashion show.
Or you could plant something into an old gumboot and create an upcycled garden.
Mm-hmm.
See you very soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's do more dancing.
I want to try on your...
So I'd firstly love, Anthony, for you to tell us a little about, what the children who are watching
Yep.
that media, it's a series, it's 5 episodes actually in that series, that they're engaging with a whole range of ideas that actually really matter in the world. And I wondered how that shows up for you in the kids that you work with, but also in the kind of way that we imagine what kids are interested in as adults. Yeah.
Look, there's a beautiful saying that I often turn to, which is we have to stop insisting children fall into our intellectual landscapes. As adults, we need to surrender and fall into their intellectual landscapes. And I remind myself of this when I'm teaching children around the power of this is if I can imagine what it's like for a child to experience what they're experiencing. And I watch a clip like that and I think about how imagination is abound in that. There's something that tethers us adults 60 years down the track. We're tethered back into that space. When we were sitting here earlier on and the music was playing, we're kind of singing along and thinking, I know this song. You know, there's something so classic about play school that protects play and childhood that it's hard not to fall into that landscape as adults ourselves. So when we see moments like this, not only does it spark for us ideas as educators around how might I bring some of these ideas into childhood, because we ourselves can feel disconnected from children's play in the busyness of life or in the distance that we've travelled from childhood to where we are now. But it does connect us back to children and childhood. And I think there's a gift there when we watch clips like this and we see children so immersed into those ideas and that narrative that's presented. We have to ask ourselves, what is it about that draws childhood back into that? And where does it take me as an adult? You know, because we can't help but being connected to what we're watching.
Yeah,
And that's that thread.
Yes.
That doesn't matter how old you are, you hear, there's a couple of things that I hear, the play school song and there's 60 minutes ticking clock. I hear that ticking clock and I freak out because as a childhood I was like, there's war or there's disaster.
Yeah.
But it takes you back into childhood. And that's the magic of that. Yeah.
In terms of, I guess, children's media, you've spoken before about the Malaguzzi kind of idea of the image of the child. And I wonder if you could explain that a little bit, but also refer to what we've just seen, you know, because that, you know, the kind of concepts that are being touched on there, you know, we've got sustainability, upcycling, invention, you know, but they're being explored in a really child-friendly way.
Yeah.
In a playful way. Yeah.
Malaguzzi argues that, well, number one, if you look at it from a sociological perspective, one might argue that childhood is an invention. I mean, even in this country, we can't clearly delineate where childhood and adulthood begins and ends. Depends on the legislation. Driving, voting, you know, it's messy. There's messiness there. But what Malaguzzi argues for us is the image of the child has a huge impact. So how we see children has a huge impact in how we engage with them, what we afford them, what we don't afford them, how we understand their world. He and others have propelled this image of children being absolutely intelligent, being able to read the world around them, being creative, wanting to live in relationships with others. And when we see children in that way, what we release are images of children as being absolutely vulnerable, absolutely unknowing. And so it contests a very tight definition that in most instances rewards adults over children, you know? Because if we're the knowing ones, then they're the unknowing ones. I mean, that's that dichotomizing that often we refer to. We know one thing because we know the opposite of it. When we watch footage like that, I think it blurs all those lines. Because as adults, we do hold power in what we afford children in play. We choose when we interrupt and when we don't. And when we hold an image of a child as someone who's trying to make sense of themselves and the people around us, we see play or, you know, some of those narratives that we saw like sustainability or even how we decorate our bodies with clothing as a way of interrupting some of those long-held beliefs that we have about children not understanding environmental sustainability. I mean, I remind the people that we work with that the children that we teach know a lot more about Aboriginal perspectives than we did when we were in school, 18.
Absolutely.
They know a lot more about the environment than we did when we were 16. And the vehicle for that often is play. And that's the power of learning. But when we see children as not being naive, but actually being quite intelligent, then we see play as something really sophisticated.
It's really interesting that different cultures approach this in really different ways.
Yeah.
And coming from the US, we created commercial media first and then thought after 20, 30, 40 years, oops, we've missed something, and we had to go back and create public media. In places where public media, public service media was created before commercial, you really see a very different approach. Because we had to go back and refit it in the US, we take a very instructional approach to educational media, to preschool media, to the slightly older as well, where we treat children as kind of vessels to be filled up with knowledge, and pour into it. And as a result, when you look across cultures, American public media, children's media can look very didactic. Whereas if you look at Play School, if you look at some of the preschool programs that the UK, where public media was created first, developed, it's really much more about treating the child as smart, curious, eager, and a love of learning as opposed to having to push learning at them.
Yeah. And that can be really challenging to adults.
Yes.
You know, when you're, you know, I was with a child recently, a couple of months ago, who is non-verbal, and he's 2.5, and we were at a little water station, and I was just tapping the water, kind of narrating the movement of water, and I knew he wouldn't, in verbal ways, communicate back to me. But it was this little playful moment between me and this child. And an older child, a 4-year-old, came up to me and said, "Don't talk to him. He doesn't know what you're saying." And all of a sudden I thought, here we go. I mean, this was a moment, it was a shudder for me. Like, you know, I was on shaky grounds because you don't know how to respond in that moment. But I thank play for opening up that conversation. Because without that, how do you start a conversation around equity with a group of children? And that's that notion, Louise, you know, that idea of it's not always neat, it's not always lovely how we see it, but it does open up a space between adults and children, or a child, to engage in a conversation. How do we pursue it? It's not through a textbook, it's back through play. And that's the nice part about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Louise, you had a few observations to make about how language operates in that clip as well.
Absolutely. So looking at that, which you could go on for hours and hours about what's actually in that very tiny clip of less than a minute. And what you see there is the interaction between play, language, storytelling, music. And if we come back to, yes, it's 60 years, what hasn't changed is the intentionality in here of what they're aiming for here. So if you think about the Make and Create studio, that tiny little clip, what have we got there? We've got the adults role modelling the voice, going up and down, role playing. Who am I? I'm in character, I'm out of character. You have lots of repetition and lots of rhyme, you know, let's craft or build or decorate. But then the open-ended question, they're bringing the child in by saying, what should we make? Now, they're not telling the child what they're going to make. They're still leaving this pondering, curiosity, imagination still for the child that's watching and listening. But then they model the language. A bit of blue. Now, they don't tell you what's blue, but the blue is there. Then we have sprinkle, sprinkle. It's repeated, but the music starts to give the child an idea of what sprinkle might mean. I may not know what sprinkle is, but I'm watching and I'm listening to music that has a similar sort of noise. So this multimodal meaning making to help the child comprehend what's going on in the show. But then they start to show other things like the social side of language, you know, how we use language in a social situation. It's my turn, it's your turn, it's the next person's. The others stand back, they watch, they ask questions. Then they ask and open a question of each other. Then they come back to the screen. there's the child still watching. Would you like to make this? Or do you have this at home? So it's always relating back to the child. You know, when the presenter says, now would you like to see what's in there? And then they model this typical language, yes please, or absolutely. Both of those kind of responses are appropriate for the time. That might change over time because absolutely, you know, 10 years ago wasn't a way that we would respond to a question. So they're actually role modelling sort of the culture and the society in which we're in, but they're also supporting the adult that's watching to, you can do some of these things at home as well, and also role modelling to the child. I love that song, the Ning Nang Nong, and if those that know that song, you know, and I am a 60-year-old that I can actually say that I watched that. Now that was written that by Spike Milligan in 50s, I think, and here it is adapted to music. Now, what's in that is nonsense. What is it? Is alliteration, where things rhyme, where children are just having fun with language, but they're also having fun with other things that's in the screen. They don't make sense because a cow doesn't go bong and whatever else doesn't go ping. And it's this reverse, but it's okay to play. And here's your playfulness that comes in of learning. It's okay to rhyme. It's playful, it's silly, but it's okay just as to dress up in a skirt and a dress. But in amongst that intentionality of that skirt or the hat was an ice cream container. It's okay, we don't have to have the hat that looks like a hat, because if you understand how pretend play develops, that's object substitution. And as children develop that from from a concrete to an abstract, they can turn that ice cream bucket. If I'm 2, that's an ice cream bucket. I can't get that out of my head perhaps. But when I'm 3 and 4, I can turn it into a hat, or I can turn it into a ship, or I can turn it into a boat. And then what we know from the research in a study we did, once children can do that with pretend play, that they can use objects for multiple things in the play, it actually predicts their spoken language and their receptive listening language. So all of this is going on, plus all of the print that's in there, the writing, even the song. The song comes in, there's colour, but there are blocks. They represent letters which make up words, which make up sounds, which have meaning. So it's all of this meaning making through multiple modes that happen. I'll stop there because I could go on for hours. I'm sorry.
No, I could listen to you do that forever.
I do, sorry.
I mean, you know, Play School is an example of a really quality piece of children's media. I guess, David, I'm interested how we define quality children's media. And I think what should parents or educators or even screen creators, what should they be aiming for?
Quality begins with the child. It begins with the individual child. What is quality for one child may not be for another. And I'll go back to a story. My older daughter is now 38. I've been telling this story since she was 3. Maybe
She must
4.
love that.
There was a program on Nickelodeon in the U.S. called Guts, and Guts was a show, athletic events basically. But they had created athletic events that didn't always favor the fastest, the strongest. It favored the child who strategized or who took their time to think it through before approaching it, or who was persistent. And my daughter was not a particularly athletic kid, but when we would go to the playground, she would say, "Let's play Guts." And what that meant to her, and by the way, no one ever made this program to be an educational program, going back to the education and entertainment. But somebody thought it through enough to say, we don't want the boys to always win. We don't want the biggest kid to always win. We want everyone to have a chance. So my daughter would say, "Let's play Guts." And what that meant was, give me an obstacle course to run and time me doing it. And she just had the greatest time with that. For her, that was quality children's television. So quality begins with the needs of the child. We're starting to change the language, actually. I've been following something really interesting happening in the UK, where they're starting to talk about value, not quality, because quality often gets interpreted to be the formal features of the program, the scripting, the camera work, the editing, which are all incredibly important. But what is the outcome? What is the influence of the program? What does it contribute to the life of the child? What does it contribute to the life of the country? In the UK, they're quite, and I've experienced this here as well, quite concerned about the influence about making sure that children grow up understanding where they're from and understanding Australian culture here, understanding UK culture. And that's a matter of value. That's what in the UK they want to take to Parliament and say, you need to support children's programming because we need to bring value to children. So I think we're at this interesting tipping point where quality absolutely is still important. It has to do with respect for the child. It has to do with thoughtfulness. So much of what's coming to kids these days, especially via YouTube, is not vetted, is not really thought through. It's just something that someone made and put up. And it exists on an equal plane with what public service broadcasters are putting out or what traditional producers are creating. So we are at this tipping point between quality and value now.
What's really interesting is many of the examples show that beyond the screen, the play continues. So we watch Play School, or the example you just gave, that once the screen is off, it still has an influence, and that's quite powerful to see the legacy of media on children and how they experience it beyond the screen.
And that's why I never talk about television as a passive medium, because yes, it is a lean-back medium in a lot of ways, but the best things happen. I think it was the creator of Sesame Street, Joan Gans Cooney, who said, television is the only appliance that's more valuable after you turn it off. That if you walk away with a song to sing, if you walk away with a dress-up idea, if you walk away with and go and get your stuffies and act out what you've seen, that's incredibly valuable.
YouTube has actually sort of quantified what it means by quality recently, and is trying to kind of find a way to practice that.
Primarily for older kids.
I see.
Think. Less with YouTube Kids, but more for the 6 to 12, where they've put out a set of guidelines that are what they define as quality. I think it's a great step for them. I also think that it tends to be focused on what goes into a program and not, as I was describing with value for the child, what comes out of a program. There's no violence and there's no bad language and there's, it's what's missing as opposed to what the added value is.
Louise, what have you observed in terms of, I guess, parental or carer anxiety in terms of children consuming quality media or media with value, and do you think that anxiety is warranted?
We have interviewed the parents, and there are other projects outside of this one, but we do interview the parents afterwards and just ask them about, their experience with Play School. We had a lot of that intergenerational discussion, and then we asked them, what they thought of the exhibition, how do you engage with the child, what do you do at home with it, and how often would you watch Play School, and do you watch Play School, and on what, or any other things. And for many, oh yes, it brings back my own childhood. It's fantastic because it reminds me of this safe time. It was a scheduled time. It was a time often with snacks, or it was a time that we'd sit down in our fold-out couches and eat something, and we were allowed to watch, and then we danced and we sang, and then afterwards we made things. So a lot of the parents reminisced about that. And then I said, Nan, what about for your child? And I would have to say the majority of them said, only for a little bit, because I don't let them watch it on screen. So this discourse that's out in, in the media, no screens before 2. And so they feel this immediate guilt because they're watching Play School. But I turn it off as soon as it's finished. And, we're sort of saying it's fine, you can watch it. And, but we don't use it on an iPad because they'll walk off with it and watch it again. And I said, how fantastic. And then I went, no, you can't do that. So there is this, good versus bad, and rather than how important this is to watch. And, the co-viewing, we know that, all the research around that too, how important that is, and parents sharing that, then they have this beautiful time where then they'll go and make whatever it is that they've just watched on the, and then they'll pull out, toilet rolls and bits of paper and oh my gosh, I have got it around the house and I can do that. So it's beyond the screen, but there is still this anxiety that they shouldn't be watching any screen. But it's interesting because I also asked them, did you watch it on television? Oh, yeah, they watch it on TV. So sometimes TV doesn't compute to screens, but screens on mobile or smartphones and things are screens, and they're bad for you. So there is this, and I think we've got to, that's what we're trying to do.
To bring us back to the image of the child, that's our guilt and anxiety about how we are related to our devices being projected into the child's experience.
Well, I think there's that, and I think we have to be very aware too of the whole safety issue. I mean, that's brought up, as we know, quality and what's educational and what's not educational, and the online safety is critical, and that's that education of both.
That's true.
I have a Rorschach test that I use in talks often of two images on two successive slides, and the first one is the typical image that you see with articles about children and screen time, a term that I hate since so many different things come through screens. But the first is that typical image that always is with the article of a child in a dark room, face illuminated by the screen. And you get people's reactions to that, and then you flip to the next slide, and it's a child underneath a blanket with a torch and a book. And we react very differently to that.
I'm going to take us to the next clip that we have, just because it's a really beautiful little film, and it's one that I might ask you, David, to introduce.
It is, as I say, I've been in this business for 35 years. I've seen a lot of children's television through the International Children's TV Festival. And this is the program that has stayed with me the most. I have probably seen it 120 times by now. I see new things every time I watch. It speaks to a couple different things. One is it was created for a program exchange, where we're in a really difficult time right now with children's television worldwide, that there is no good financial model. This was a case of every country that participated in the exchange made one 5-minute film about it that began and ended in a child's doorway, somewhere in the country that made it. And in between, the child has an adventure. You make one and you get the rights to all the others. So for the cost of making one 5-minute film, you could get an entire series. It's cost effective, but what really strikes me is this is a master class in storytelling without words, in direction, in exposing a community. I think my favorite thing about it is it takes a community that many people will have expectations about or preconceptions about and really opens it up to a child-centered perspective on what you might miss if you just went with your preconceptions about that community. And then it also has a mystery running through it. And I'd encourage you, listen carefully to the sound and how it changes through it, the music, and try to anticipate why what you see in the first minute leads to the ending of it. It's called The Boy, the Slum, and the Pan Lids.
Zezé, volta aqui! Vamos ver se aqui vai comer a tampa, Zezé, volta aqui! Vocês vão correndo! Cadê esse menino?
filled with examples of playfulness throughout. The boy kicking the soccer ball into the goal as he runs through and with everyone chasing him. Just lovely bit of direction.
He's a superhero, really. One of the things that I was thinking about that is perhaps examined or perhaps under acknowledged in watching that clip is how important music is for children's media. And it tells the whole story. And Play School has an entirely composed soundtrack. Likewise, Bluey's success, in my opinion, is a lot to do with the fact that if it is on in your house, it is not grating. It is a pleasure to listen to. Every 7 minutes has its own unique composition, and that composition is driven by household objects a lot of the times, or tinky-tonk pianos, or things that children will relate to, but adults also enjoy. I was really thinking about the role of music and how powerful it is for children as its own form of language, alongside play, while we were watching that clip.
And the hints that it gives through the program.
Yeah.
The new thing I heard this time was as soon as he comes out the door, you start hearing the pattern that will come back later in the band.
Which brings back to that multimodal meaning making that is so important for children in comprehension.
We touched on it earlier, but I'm curious to talk a little bit more about co-viewing and intergenerational engagement, because I do think shows like Bluey have made that more prominent within children's media as an offer. Anthony, from a developmental perspective, what happens when children and adults share any experience, but particularly media experience? What's going on?
Yeah, there's been some really beautiful research by Christian Wardell around not only the roles that we take up alongside children in play, so guardian at the gate or the script maker, but what happens when we engage with children. And there was some lovely work there around the increase in language, like about 300%, but how long the play continues when adults know the role to take. So sometimes we don't have to interrupt. We need to be clear about that, because sometimes our interruption actually does that. It just stops the play. But when we can read what's happening in play, being involved in it can lead to longevity. So it's knowing the role you want and watching the cues from children, not just imposing yourself. So there's that lovely pedagogical dance around, should I enter? And if I enter, what should I be doing? Like, who's leading what? Should I lead it so it continues, or should I use language so it complicates the play? Or should I sit back and wanting me not to be the protagonist, but the person who plays along with them? And there is a sophistication to that. I think sometimes adults feel like they need to dominate things. But when you can read the nuances in children's play, you begin to understand, and I think the title even of tonight's really powerful, because I don't think the world is convinced about the power of play, but also the role that we need to take up in that. And I sometimes make missteps, I have to say, as a teacher of children. I'm like, I shouldn't have interrupted. And I apologise and I step back, but I realise actually there's no going back to what it was when I've interrupted the play. Or I've stood back a bit too long and I've missed the opportunity to keep children sustained in that play.
Yeah, right.
And then how do you tether them back in? Because sometimes it's really hard to do that. That missed opportunity, unless you can entice them back, you just got to value what you've seen. I don't know if you've noticed that the role adults play is really critical in play.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some old work by Beecher and Arthur, but there's also work we've been doing. And for some, it's a continuum of what they call, setting up the environment so the child can play. There's when you become the director to when you just become the observer, right through to the player. And what we see is when it's interactive, because at different times the child will need support, depending what you're looking at as well. Are you looking at the child and wanting, as educators, to support the child's language? Are you there to support their play? So if you're there to support their play and you've got a child who's not up to abstract thinking yet, then you would then support them in a very different way to a child that can pick up a block and use it as an aeroplane, but 5 seconds later it's the rocket ship going off into the moon. That's very different, and the role of us is like, when do you do that? Is kind of this observation that you're talking about, and knowing where children are at in all of these, play, language, storytelling, whatever it might be. You're doing 1,000 things at once because, for some of the educators that I work with, some of the things that they'll say to me is, what am I supposed to be doing? And even some of the parents, actually, after we interviewed them, or before they went in the exhibition, they said to me, Louise, what do you want us to do in here? And I said, be you, I'm going. Sort of left. There's this thing, do I have to perform? But parents are intuitive. They know how to support their children in that. And as educators...
Isn't that the interesting thing about play school, though? We're not watching children play, we're watching adults facilitate the play. So it's...
But it's also interesting in play school that they use the teddies.
Yes.
Sometimes almost like a child. They, it's intentionality again. Like the teddy, so Big Ted might be the one that says, oh, and what's this? Which is actually them sort of preempting that that's probably what the children are doing when they're watching. So Ted takes on that role. He's a live child almost, or the other co-presenter does it. They're very clever. It's like, the child will be saying, well, what's sprinkle mean? For example. It's this, isn't it, Ted? Oh, yes, you've got that. Oh, this is also what it means to sprinkle, like the water on the thing. It's all very intentional about either supporting children. In that case, it's language. If it's play, it might be, we don't have an umbrella and it's raining. Oh, don't worry, we'll put this and we'll make this piece of felt and we'll just put it over our head. So that's supporting their pretend play skills. So they understand where the children are at. But adults do have to move in and out of that role and know when to.
So it's the tension there is that we might think that play comes natural to children, but actually it's a task of an adult. That intentionality is not often natural for an adult.
Oh, no.
It's performative to some degree because it is sophisticated.
There's David, earlier you referred to, an article when we were planning this talk about, play being something that is attached to a greater level of privilege. Are some children more confident to engage with play than others? Are they all playing in the same way equally, if acknowledging age differences? Like sometimes there will be kids that do require for different scaffolding or different kind of interventions for inclusion or other kinds of reasons.
At a top level, I would say that play requires time and to be in a mind space, in a mood to engage with your child, and that's more often available to people who have privilege of some level. I think we saw something interesting during the pandemic at David with the research we were doing, where parents who were home had time to watch what their kids were doing on screens often changed their minds. They moved away from the concept of screen time and moved toward, if their child was, these are older children, not preschool, but if they were building in Minecraft, wait, you built that? Instead of, you've been on that thing for 3 hours, turn it off. It was, how did you learn how to do that? Or, I never knew you were so into whatever hobby or passion that the child had, but I see you're spending a lot of time. That is a matter of privilege, to have the time and space to be able to do that.
Great.
Yeah. There's a few questions that have come through from people that are about play for older children that I'd love to hear your perspectives on. Someone has asked, about children's ability to continue to learn through play as they grow older, since they often stop around ages 6 or 7. Is that what you also experience?
Well,
or does it shift?
I think it shifts. It's what I was saying earlier about at 6 or 7, they really start diverging off into hobbies, passions, peer groups, and they find different ways to play depending on what those passions are.
But it's environmental, right, as well, so school restricts the amount of time they've got available, but often the built environment has a big impact too. that they're in, that whether it's play equipment that is quite, different for little kids versus teenagers, and how they're able to move their bodies.
Having space to play certainly plays a role in it. Being able to, and again, it comes back to privilege of being able to run out the door into a safe neighborhood, into having a park nearby that's safe, and having parents who trust the children to go off and play on their own. I'm not sure that's answering it fully, but welcome.
I was thinking there around some. We were on the periphery of some work around artists who were working with children in galleries, and what was really interesting is the artists saw the way they engage with material very similar to how children play. And when they spoke to artists about the interaction between them and materiality, they would often use language similar to children, like, I was playing with the paints, I was experimenting with the light. And so we might lose it for a period of time, but then we see it as an essential task for creativity as adults, because many artists are playing with ideas or they're playing with materials. So yes, I think there's a period of time where we perhaps take learning very seriously, or we confine this idea around how we define learning, but then much of the artwork that we value in this world comes out of play.
It requires it.
It requires
absolutely.
it. I mean, it wouldn't be created without playfulness or playing with ideas or materials
With one of the projects, we've been working in a school for several years. It was a school in a low socioeconomic area where play was not embedded in the school. One of our big things was to kind of embed play right through from first year of school through to the final grade 6. And what this school has done is actually flipped their whole curriculum and way of kind of thinking with the students. And it's they embed what they call storyboards that they build up over a term, and it's all through play, right through to grade 6. So grade 6s were doing Parliament, depending on their themes. Another was doing sustainability, and they went right back. They built at one level it was the year 2025, in below it was year 1900 or something, and then this sort of juxtaposition and what happened when the internet came through, for example. And so they were going to build this, fantastic land where everything was safe and sustainable and all of this. So they had to problem solve all of these things that were happening. Okay, what would happen? Where does it go? Where are the cables? And so all of a sudden they're building those underneath with rope and things like that. But before they did that, some of the students didn't have a clue about what internet was, what is it? So they role-played that, where you've got children, one standing in the middle on a thing, and they put skipping ropes out. So this was the router, and then once you put the skipping ropes out, then that's where, and they did it through their body first, then into the classroom, then into this play. So it can be done, and it's sort of about, if we think about what play is about, problem solving, building narrative, being creative, all those things that we've talked about already, that's sort of how they embed it. But they did flip the whole thing.
It's interesting. We did a similar research project here in Melbourne, out in the city of Dandenong, with a school for 7 years, turning the entire school to playful curriculum. And there were some really lovely things, like to enter this big classroom, we actually built wardrobes, like you walked in like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. And we got photos of children open up these wardrobes and walking into this big play space. And what was intriguing for us is they decided to start with the younger children because they thought this would come more naturally to them. So children in their first 2 years of school, that they might have to teach the older children how to play. But what became very evident over these many years is that much of our work was teaching the adults how to play alongside the children. The children had no issue in playing with it was a big space, like blocks and, like just art materials and what you would call your standard early childhood classroom. But for these teachers, it was revolutionary. But it was the adults who struggled. Because there was still this idea that we had to maintain control. But when they let go, because, the questions beforehand, because we spent years trying to prep these adults into this way, because their language was, how do we assess? What are we going to do? How will we control children? Like, what if it gets out of control? But what we noticed really quite easily was when we first opened the wardrobes and they walked in, children worked together. They clustered together. There wasn't chaos. In fact, they noticed that the everyday classroom was chaos. They had to do more controlling. But in the playful environment, there were these gatherings of children and their language was so sophisticated that we moved in the following 2 years around how do you move from standardised assessment to assessing knowledge in play. But it was the adults who really struggled, not the children.
That's a beautiful project. One of our questions is, and I'd love all of your perspectives on this, what could schools learn from Play School and how to engage children and respect their curiosity and intelligence? I mean, you've given us a beautiful example already, Anthony, but I guess specifically the kinds of tactics or intentions that we see in Play School, how could it be adopted into a sort of school environment, do you think?
It's probably more.
Yeah, that's hard to comment from America.
Can I just give another example?
Yeah,
we had another project here in Victoria funded by the department, which was around and it's been published and it might still be on the department's website. So we took early childhood people, it was so fantastic, and took them out and popped them into a school for 2 years.
Oh, really?
And then took school teachers and popped them into an early childhood program for 2 years and to watch what happened. Like, how do these worlds coexist? At the beginning, we had 4 sites around Victoria. But to get it started, we actually did this kind of little bus tour of taking the early childhood people and the school people to each other's sites, just so they could kind of watch what's going on, because we knew there would be some issues. And then we interviewed them after around what did you notice? Like, what did you notice as an early childhood person going into a school environment before we put you in there for a while? And what did the teachers notice? And what became very apparent to us was school teachers reported how they underestimated the capacity of young children. And there was one comment that really struck me, and I wish we could just write a whole research about it, was one of the teachers said, those early childhood people, they're so respectful. And we said, why? What did you notice? Like, what was it? Did we miss something? And they said, they have a sponge for like the table and a sponge for like vomit and a sponge for like food. We just use the same sponge in schools. And we're like, that really struck you? Like, we have these coated sponges? And it was this underestimation around, and I'm sure, people respect children, don't get me wrong, but how much respect and dignity were held for children in the early years.
Yeah, how interesting.
That for some of the teachers, this was this epiphany around, they know a lot more than we give them credit for. Like, they feed themselves. We didn't know they help themselves to resources. And it was really intriguing when those worlds collide, because I truly believe children think we live on different planets between the two systems and just wish we spoke to each other more often, because it wouldn't be this shudder that happens between one education system and the other. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good example. We have one more clip, and I'd love to play it so that we can, just offer some final observations having watched the final clip. Thanks, Dogs.
Play School. It's Play School.
Have you heard of the 1960s? They were over 60 years ago.
Well, let's go back to the 60s.
Yeah.
In the time machine, turn back the clock. In the time machine, here we go.
For fondue, we need lots and lots of cheese.
Did they have cheese in the 60s, Alex?
Yes, people have had cheese for a long time, Justine.
Fascinating. Oh, I can see something. Oh, look. It's the moon lander. And here comes an astronaut. Oh, I can't hear anything. What? Turn up the room. Where's the remote?
What's a remote? In the 60s, most TVs didn't have a remote. They had a dial on the front of the TV.
Put on your helmet and buckle up real tight. Get ready for the countdown and count with all your might.
Well, it's time for us to go now.
We've got to get back to the present.
Maybe you'd like to pretend to time travel.
Or make some yummy 60s food.
Right.
See you next
See you
time.
soon.
Bye.
Bye.
So we've got about 7 minutes left. I'm curious for each of you to offer a bit of, given the depth of the complexity, actually, of what's being done in that really small window of media. I'm curious for each of you to kind of offer us your thoughts on what makes you optimistic about the future of what our children are engaging with on screen, and what, if that took us back in time but did it with so much humour and so much grace, why should we be confident, I guess, with the kind of media that our children are engaging with now?
When I first watched this clip, it really struck me. I was not confused by it, but a little bit, because I thought 60 years ago, to a child of 2 to 5, may as well be the moon. Was that before or after breakfast 60 years ago?
And were there dinosaurs there?
Yeah. And then what struck me about it was something that I've seen across children's television in particular over a long time, which is kids can take in a remarkable amount of difference if you just give them a little handhold of familiarity. And in this clip, what struck me along those lines was, did they have cheese back then? that puts it into the child's day-to-day world. So it helps them connect to the rest of it, which will be completely out of time, but will at least be they won't turn off to it. They won't. The curtain won't come down. In terms of what makes me optimistic, this may sound like backtracking a little, but the flip in the media industries from a very small number of commissioners who, if your idea doesn't appeal to them, you're out of luck, to many more opportunities for people to bring their ideas, whether it's to the screen with television, whether it's to games. We're now hiring 18, 19-year-old game builders at our company who started making games when they were 12 just because they wanted to make the games they wanted to play. And by the time they're 18, through completely intrinsic motivation to build, they've become professional quality. So I'm encouraged that the generation that's coming up now will have ways to express its creativity, to bring ideas to peers, to the world.
Sorry, David, just to go a little further on that, do you think that because they are engaging with the tools of the creation so early, they are therefore also more literate and critical about what they watch, or is that a different set of skills?
It's a different set of skills, and I think we too often mistake facility for literacy. That the ability to, we look at kids and say, oh, they're so good with their smartphones and that, but it's not necessarily the critical literacy of how to use it and thinking through some of the content that they consume.
Yeah, great. What makes you confident, Louise, having spent a lot of time with these families and their very small people?
When you look at something like that, I just keep coming back to, I know I've said it a couple of times, the intentionality of that. And something, you ask about impact of things. Well, 60 years is sort of an indicative impact in itself. So what's changed? If you think about, because I did go back to an old episode because I wanted to see John, because I grew up with handsome John. And you think about it and the structure is still there. And I think that if we're thinking about how children learn, how children develop, how children play, all those things are going to stay relatively constant. It's about how we change with that, with what's available in the resources and the environment that we have to offer. And how exciting for the next 60, I think, it's fantastic.
Anthony? I was thinking about the resources and the simplicity that pipe cleaners, crepe paper and cardboard will last a lifetime. And one of my most exciting times recently working with a play school team was going into the craft, is it called the studio? The art department. It was like the best thing ever.
So
and I was
beautiful.
gifted this beautiful crepe little flower to give to my great nieces. And I found it so hard to give to them. I did gift it to them, but I thought there's something so wonderful about the simplicity of play that despite the complexity that's going to be around, you can always create something with nothing around children. It's just that imagination which we can't be robbed of. I have to say my local markets, my local farmers markets, Bettina, is it Bettina? Benita shops there. And every time I see her, I'm like, and you just watch the whole markets all go. So there's, it lasts forever. So, I love that clip because probably 60 years ago they were using the same resources and they'll probably use the same resources in another 60 years. That's right. That to me is just so fantastic.
That's a really good note to end on. So, hey, thank you all so much for being here. Our exhibition, if you haven't brought your friends or families or children, it runs until mid-July and it is free for all to attend, but you do need to book. The next 2 talks in this series take place in June and September, and they feature some really fantastic speakers like Georgie Dent and Leah Vanderberg and Derek McCormack as well. I'll also mention that last week we did announce that in the middle of next year we're going to be opening a major exhibition here at ACMI that goes behind the scenes of Bluey, and you can sign up for more info about that on our website. Finally, I just wanted to offer some really sincere thanks to Laura Stone and Ari Offman for their fabulous producing work for this evening. Thank you all so much for being here. You've been a fantastic audience, and have a great night.